Satoru Gojo and his immense power is not only incredibly complex and interesting, it is seemingly unstoppable. His limitless allows him to not be touched by anything, and his immeasurable void can seemingly fry the brain of anyone within the domain. But this has turned into a notion that Gojo just simply cannot lose, not only to anybody in Jujutsu Kaisen, but anybody in fiction. But this video is going to clearly display the ways he can lose. I think it will be important to show two distinct limits of his powers right off the bat, to show that he can be beaten, or at least he is not just limitless in every single way. Because, also, in the Jujutsu Kaisen manga, he has been technically beaten. He was sealed away within the prison realm. And there was also this moment in the Jujutsu Kaisen prequel manga where someone was able to directly bypass the limitless defense, as he had a special rope that allowed him to actually hit Gojo, as Gojo was forced to actually parry the strike, which he wouldn't have to if his infinity was working. So with these two clear limits to his powers and abilities, it stands to reason that he is not unbeatable, and this is just the tip of the iceberg for why. With that being said, let's get into it. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is Broku. Thank you guys so much for all the support on all my videos, especially the Jujutsu Kaisen ones. I've been loving doing those. They're fun. It's fun doing videos on a different series that I also really like. Because this is Gojo, let's shoot for a 2,000 like goal. Subscribe if you do enjoy, and also turn notifications. You can also join my Twitter and Discord that are linked down below. That being said, let's get into it. One thing I want to say off the bat is that I am not attacking Gojo here. Gojo is my favorite character in Jujutsu Kaisen. He is amazing. I love his powers. They are incredibly interesting, incredibly cool, somewhat mysterious. He's a funny character. He's badass. I love Gojo. He's one of my favorites. This is not in any way hating him. This is just to explain why he is not unbeatable. So the reason why I wanted to bring up those two limits of Gojo in the intro of the video is because I needed to draw you guys in. Because I want you guys to be drawn in. Because first, I want to give a bit of a briefer of Gojo's powers and how they work before I kind of show why he is not unbeatable and he can be beaten. Because it is pretty complex compared to the power sets of most people in fiction. Now I'll explain first how Gojo actually lost in the manga before I tell you kind of how his powers work. So remember, people will still argue that he's unbeatable despite essentially losing in the manga. See, the reason how Gojo could lose is it took 3 special grades to fight him all at once, while they had another immensely powerful character in the brain who was in Geto's body involved. They also had to plan all of this out. They all knew Gojo's weaknesses, and they had to use the innocent civilians in the area as leverage so that Gojo couldn't fight normally. And then after all of this, Gojo would eventually be trapped by the magic item prison realm. Now people will say that in normal versus battle scenarios, this isn't allowed. In versus battle scenarios, it's a neutral site, no civilian, no magic item, or it's even converted to just a 1v1, not essentially a 4v1 or more. Then Gojo would pretty much defeat anyone if it was just a 1v1. Well, it is true that if it was a neutral site in this scenario, with no civilians, no prison item, Gojo wins this. In fact, he probably wins it very easily. So, yeah, they're kind of right in a sense, but that doesn't mean he can beat anyone. And the fact that this L that he took, it adds limitations to him now, because that means he isn't truly limitless. So I'm going to give a brief summary. So Gojo's power stems from both Limitless, his cursed power, and 6 Eyes, which are inherited from his family. While we don't necessarily know much about Gojo's 6 Eyes, it seems to help with how formidable he is with the control of Limitless. We know far more about Limitless than the 6 Eyes. For one, I'll give a brief thing about curse energy. It is essentially the fuel to use curse power and curse techniques. It is similar to mana in Black Clover or Ki in Dragon Ball, though not entirely the same, just kind of a similarity. The baseline of Limitless is the manipulation of space at the atomic level, and this allows him to use one of his most broken abilities called Infinity. While Infinity is something that exists naturally, he brings it into reality. This means that in a sense, he should never be hit by his opponents because he is infinitely slowing them down, either that or their attack, so they could never hit him. This is compared to the paradox of Achilles and the tortoise, where a Greek philosopher theorized that Achilles could never catch the tortoise because there's an infinite amount, number lengths between them, as they can get closer and closer and closer, but he would never reach. Interestingly enough, this paradox has been solved by Aristotle because Achilles was actually traveling across infinite subdivisions of a finite number. For example, if the tortoise is 3 meters ahead of Achilles, there is technically an infinite amount of points, like 2.7 meters or 2.77777777777, and so on meters between them. But there's still only 3 meters of finite space between them. So, he could catch up. Maybe Gojo's the one who should have stayed in school. Either way, Gojo describes it as he slows things down that approach him so that they never actually reach him. He also has Curse Technique Reversal Blue, which allows him to amplify Limitless by negative numbers. Gojo states that this allows for situations such as -1 apples to exist. This warps space to cause a magnetic effect. An advancement of this technique is Curse Technique Reversal Maximum Output Azure Glow. That was a doozy. Which is essentially the same, but just vastly more powerful. Now the opposite of the blue technique is red, which is the opposite effect. Instead of attracting, it repels. It is essentially a reverse curse technique that uses positive cursing. Now our chatty sensei Gojo can actually combine these two abilities to what is called hollow purple. Because you know, blue and red, that equals purple. And it makes sense, as it will cause the effects to combine where it is both trying to retract and attract at the same time, causing it to completely pull things apart. Now Gojo's final and ultimate ability is the Immeasurable Void. It can also be called the Infinite Void or Unlimited Void, depending on the translation, but this is when Gojo does his own domain expansion. Domain expansion is essentially expanding your own essence and forming your own space. In this domain, you get a buff to your stats, it is hard for your opponents to reside in it, and your attacks will always hit. Now when Gojo activates his, he instills his opponent with a seemingly infinite amount of sensory information, to the point where he incapacitates them, or even kills them if it's on for too long. Though, those who he chooses to remain unaffected in this void will not be harmed, as when Yuji was in the domain with him against Jogo, he was fine. Now that I provided a general explanation of his powers, it's time to go over why he isn't unbeatable. Well, the Prison Realm, as an item, was able to trap and seal away Gojo. It was able to touch him and then trap him away, even though Gojo's Limitless was active at the time, which means it shouldn't have touched him. I will come back to this and explain this stated by Gojo, that his defenses are essentially useless in a domain expansion, as Jogo's attacks would be allowed to hit him, and it would force him to strike back. So that's another limit. Next I'll go over is when Gojo was fighting Jogo and Hanami at the same time. Chozo was also there fighting, but he really wasn't an important part of this part of what I need to reference. Jogo and Hanami would activate Domain Amplification. With this active, it would allow them to bypass Gojo's Limitless Infinity defenses, and they could land blows upon him, making him vulnerable. Gojo himself compared Domain Amplification to Simple Domain, which is like an anti-domain expansion. The fourth and final time Gojo's defenses were defeated was in the prequel manga, when this dude with a curse rope was able to straight bridge the gap of that infinity and hit Gojo, forcing him to parry the strikes. Again, this is 4 instances of his supposedly impenetrable defenses being penetrated, thus making it consistent that it would be a no-limits fallacy that the infinity protects Gojo from everything. Now this really hasn't been confirmed, but it seems that Gojo is susceptible to attacks that have to do with spatial manipulation. As 3 of the 4 times this has happened, it was essentially related to spatial attacks. The Prison Realm is a space to trap people in. Domain Expansion is a spatial expansion, and thus so Domain Amplification has to do with a simple domain. We also know that a lot of Gojo's abilities are described with space, as he manipulates space at the atomic level. If you go through the mini monologues, Gojo is always bringing up space when he was referring to attacks. When you add in the full context by pairing these together, it would seem that Gojo's weakness is spatial attacks, things like spatial manipulation, spatial hacks. So, in theory, Longros's offensive spatial magic and a lot of other characters with spatial magic in fiction would be able to affect Gojo because of his apparent weakness to spatial magic or spatial manipulation. And again, it makes sense because of his basis of his power is itself manipulating space. Now, of course, these characters have to be fast enough to hit Gojo. You can't just have spatial magic and hit him. But I'll get into his speed and stuff in a later portion of this video. I'd also say that people who have higher dimensional attack potency or who exist on a higher dimension should be also able to bypass Gojo's defenses, as it is regarded by the infinite. But if people exist on a higher dimension, that's like immeasurably above the concept of infinity, which means it would be bypassed as well. Also, based on how it is explained, the limitless infinity works is it essentially infinitely slows down attacks so they never hit. And it's probably that those with infinite speed would completely bypass the defenses of limitless infinity. Then above that, people with inaccessible speed should also definitely bypass it as well. And then of course, people with immeasurable or irrelevant speed would also bypass Gojo's defenses without difficulty. Now if you don't know what these speed tiers are, I'll give a brief explanation. And I'm going to credit a different YouTuber here actually found this video. So go watch his, he does like videos talking about power scaling, and I took this from him. So I'm going to link it here so you can go check him out. But he kind of says that infinite speed is traveling an infinite distance in finite time. So that'd be like traveling an infinite realm or something like that in 5 seconds. Inaccessible speed is moving a finite or infinite amount of time in 0 time. This would be like moving in a realm that doesn't have time or time doesn't exist. Immeasurable speed is moving any distance in negative time. That would be essentially moving so fast that you can travel through time. Finally is irrelevant speed, which is kind of the hardest to describe. Like, it's just a weird concept to think of, especially if you don't know power scaling, because I honestly still struggle with it fully, but it's kind of like you're so fast, essentially, that the concept of speed or the concept of space and time, you surpass it. Like, you surpass the concept of speed and time. So, check out his video if you want to know more about speed scaling and those specific things, because they are the hardest ones to comprehend. Now, like I said, infinite speed characters, I would say, would probably surpass the infinity of Gojo, since if they are moving at infinite speed and Gojo is infinitely slowing them down, it might mean that they can hit him, because Gojo's only gone against people with finite speed. Now, again, I'm still somewhat iffy on infinite speed. Maybe it wouldn't work, but anyone above that with inaccessible, immeasurable, or irrelevant speed should easily bypass the defenses of the limitless infinity, because those vastly surpass infinite speed as a concept. Now this means that someone like Goku, who easily has infinite speed and can be scaled to inaccessible or immeasurable speed since he defeated someone who surpassed time, that would mean that Goku's attacks would soar right through Gojo and his defenses. Now let us talk about Immeasurable Void again. While it is a very impressive attack, as it essentially overloads and fries the brains of victims, but if someone has resistance to mind hacks, then this wouldn't do anything, or it wouldn't be as effective. So, if people have resistance to mind hacks, then they might not even be frozen within the domain, which makes the main point of Immeasurable Void null, because people wouldn't be frozen inside of it. Because if you have resistance to mind hacks, or if you're smart enough to comprehend that much information, then it wouldn't affect you, because it wouldn't be overloading you. It would just feel like nothing's happening to you. Now, it is also stated by the narrator that Gojo, he actually instills half a year's worth of information into someone's mind in 0.2 seconds, which it is weird because it would actually contradict what Gojo states himself, that his power is instilling infinity into them, but the narrator should also be a higher authority. And the manga has also even stated that Gojo is quite an arrogant character when it comes to his power. So maybe Immeasurable Void really isn't putting in the infinity. But I'm just putting that out there. Another thing that is important is Gojo's casting speed, as it would be logical to assume that the time it takes to launch an attack and his overall combat speed are relative to each other. This means that he couldn't just activate this literally instantly. It would take time to activate it, to put his hand up and actually activate the Immeasurable Void, his domain expansion. Now this would mean that if characters are way faster than Gojo, they might be able to counter or escape Gojo's Immeasurable Void before he can activate it. As for what his speed is, he has been scaled to be massively hypersonic plus, which is impressive. It means he's faster than lightning. And this is because he is much faster than Maki, who was scaled to be way faster than bullets. Now, massively hypersonic plus is a respectable speed, but there are many characters way faster. Now, for example, someone who is faster than light would be so much faster than Gojo that they would be able to do something before Gojo could get close to activating his domain expansion. Now, I have seen the argument for inaccessible speed Gojo is that because he can move in Prison Realm, which he said that it looked like time didn't pass there, and if you can move in a space, this is like I talked about, inaccessible speed earlier, if you can move in a place without time, then that would be inaccessible speed. Though this would be a bit of an outlier based on everything else in the verse, I think that it needs more context overall. Now, it could be true, but listen to me for a second. Gojo says, it looks like there is no time here, rather than straight up saying, there is no time here. It's not a direct claim. This leaves room for him to be wrong, especially since if time didn't actually pass, there shouldn't be skeletons, as if there's no time, the skin and muscle shouldn't decompose from the skeletal frame. Again, I admit that it's possible that Gojo has inaccessible speed, but we definitely need more information to make that claim. So I do believe that Gojo can be beaten not only in verse, but out of verse. Characters like Goku or Superman should be able to defeat him. And in theory, there'd be many, many more, because Goku and Superman are not the strongest characters in fiction. Also, I think that if other characters are introduced and they have spatial manipulation, it could come to show that Gojo would struggle against them. Though, remember, Gojo thought of characters like Yuta rivaling him within his own series, and he even stated that other characters could rival him. And this means that characters, if they could rival him, could maybe surpass him one day, maybe be equal to him. Now, rival doesn't mean that they're as strong as you or stronger. This means that you're simply in a relative tier. But if somebody gets into a relative level of you, then that means they should theoretically be able to also surpass you. So, at the end of the series, I don't think Gojo will be the strongest anymore. Whether that's Yuta, maybe Megumi, or Yuji, who knows? Maybe there'll be other villains that'll be stronger. You know, if Yuta, Yuji, and Megumi surpass Gojo one day, and they need to be that strong to be stronger than Gojo, then there might be a villain stronger. So, Gojo, he is the strongest sorcerer right now. At least maybe unless if Yuta has something to say about it. But that doesn't mean that he will always be, and it definitely does not mean he is the strongest character in fiction. So let me know your guys' thoughts down below. Again, I love Gojo. He would beat a lot of characters. A lot. Even powerful characters, just based on his power works. And one thing I do want to mention, I guess before I end it, is when it comes to his attack potency, like how strong his attacks are, it might kind of work like Longress, where it kind of, durability is irrelevant, because he warps space at the atomic level, and it just basically erases things. Now, what this means is that this should work on a lot of characters, if they have universal plus durability, like if they can destroy a universe or survive universal attacks. And then, also, characters who exist on higher dimensions and stuff like that, because that's just above the concept of space or infinity. The power of it, at least. Now, as for just attack potency, like in general, he has destroyed an area of what has been calculated to be city level based on his spatial manipulation, but that was using a space. So it probably is higher than him being city level. So he could just be, he has city level attack potency, but his hacks with the spatial magic or spatial curse power makes it so he's actually even higher. Like I said, probably comparable to like what Longress does with his offensive spatial magic, which erases things. But like I said, I don't hate Gojo. I didn't shit on him at all, but this is just me saying that he is not unbeatable. Again, he's incredibly powerful. He would beat so many characters. There are more characters that he would beat than he would lose to. Way more. But, alas, he is not unbeatable. Please like this if you enjoyed, comment, subscribe. Hope you guys all have an amazing day. Plus...